Thanks for tuning into the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week I've got Caroline Gonyea on with me. She is a mobility specialist, but she's also a CSCS. She's going for her DPT, and she's a yoga instructor for the Seattle Kraken. And she's going for her master's degree at Setanta College, just like I am. You can get 10% off tuition if you just use the code RS10, RS10. So a master's of science and performance coaching, or maybe it's sports injury and return to performance. Heck, they've got programs in applied sports biomechanics and movement science, as well as applied sport and exercise psychology. So check out Setanta College. And while you're online, follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Click the subscribe button, and here we go. Well, Caroline, thanks for coming on Zealous. I'm just excited to talk about a whole bunch of things with you because you are very diverse in what you're studying now, what you've studied in the past, and what you're doing. So first, hey, welcome to Zealous.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Okay, so let's just throw out some of the hats that you're wearing currently. You are a certified strength conditioning specialist who has a bachelor's in kinesiology, or what do you have it in?
Human physiology, yes.
Human physiology. All right, cool. You're going for your master's of science with Setanta College. So we are fellow students together there, which is kind of nice. Your master's is in what?
In sports rehabilitation and performance.
All right, cool. So we're pretty much similar there. I'm in sports injuries and return to performance management. And then you had to go and one up on me. You're going for your doctor of physical therapy. You're going for a DPT. And where's that out of right now?
That's through Tufts University, specifically through their Phoenix campus. So they have, I know it's kind of a curveball, but
I was going to say, yeah, Massachusetts.
I
You're back in
know.
Worcester, wherever. But no, I didn't
know.
know Tufts had an Arizona campus.
Yeah, it's a really interesting model they've rolled out. But it's a hybrid accelerated model. So essentially I'm online and asynchronous and synchronous material. And then I go about 2 weeks at a time for in-person lab immersions in Phoenix, Arizona.
Well, I have a feeling that some of the folks in Massachusetts were just really tired of the freezing winter and said, where can we move the campus?
Probably.
Arizona, that's the place you got to be. Yeah. All right. And then on top of that, you are a yoga instructor for the Seattle Kraken, the newest expansion team to the NHL, who freaking did great last season. So, well, where do we even begin? Tell us your superheroine origin story. How did you get to be with the Kraken?
It's
Kraken.
interesting. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that my whole evolution of getting into strength and conditioning and getting into yoga is honestly a whole story in itself. But specifically my work with the Kraken, I was interning with University of Washington football for the 2022 season. So I did a full year internship actually as a coaching assistant with them, and specifically with Ron McKeefrey. And he connected me with Nate Brookerson, who is the strength and conditioning coach for the Seattle Kraken.
Nate's a good guy.
He's awesome. And then sure enough, I just went in, had a conversation with them, and they brought me in to teach some yoga for the guys. So, and ever since I've been there for some development camp stuff as well, but I'm pretty much there in the capacity as just a yoga instructor. So
right on. Well, for the listening audience, you should go into the archives of the Zealous and look up my conversation with Nate, because it was just before the team hit the ice. So they didn't have even all of their players together, and he was starting to just create their year-round conditioning program without even having a team yet. He had a couple of players. So you're now one of the, I would say, coaches for the Kraken. Maybe, yeah, you are. You're one of the coaches for the Kraken as it relates to yoga. What disciplines in regards to yoga? What methods do you like? Iyengar, Hatha, Svarupa, like California Fusion. It goes by many names. Vinyasa Flow, Ashtanga. My tongue's sore. You tell me.
are you a yoga guy?
What? Yeah, I've been known to bend this way and that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Come on.
Well, my primary training is in Vinyasa yoga. So I in that training was introduced to different disciplines, such as, you get some general information about prenatal yoga and pediatrics, teaching yoga to kids, and sort of a general overview of all those things. But what kind of has evolved for me is that focus for more of a vinyasa, sort of that power yoga, if you will, in applying that more towards warm-up concepts from a strength and conditioning standpoint. And then
Nice.
also incorporating yin yoga and restorative yoga from more of a recovery standpoint. So it's a little bit of a balance for me in what I do. And then, of course, also some pranayama, which is that breath work. And I love to sneak that in as my job as a yoga instructor. I mean, this definitely ties into buy-in as well with other athletes, but I kind of like to, my yoga teacher trainer, she said it best. It's like sneaking the medicine in the cheese a little bit. Like you take that breath work and the pranayama practice of yoga and you just slowly start to introduce these athletes to it. So it's like they almost don't realize how much they're benefiting from the breath work and that whole side of the yoga practice. But you kind of sneak it in where you can. So that's kind of
I
the
totally get it. I honestly, I could see you having a little hallway conversation with the Kraken sports scientist, and he or she looking at the results of all the players and going, okay, this person is in need of some yin this week. This person's needing some pranayama, and this person's needing a lot more flow, a lot more athletic yoga, so to speak. And honestly, I like actually using the GPS on the ice or the force plate readings to show this person's really fatigued. They actually need, or this person's really stressed. They're not getting the sleep they need. There's different markers that you could actually apply to those three elements. And this is going to be an episode about you, but just a little sideline. The kind of methodology that we develop in regards to program design in my facility are based upon a person's resting posture and how they take that unconscious posture and move through space. So what are their gait mechanics and what their resting posture tells us a tremendous amount about joint placement, spacing, muscle tension relationship, and a whole bunch of other things. So traditional strength conditioning, as we have become certified in, is all about gross force production, explosiveness, and it's borrowed from bodybuilding, which is mainly about aesthetics. Maybe a hint of symmetry, but as it relates to competing on stage in a speedo, right? It doesn't align, and no pun intended, it doesn't align itself with the fundamental philosophies of yoga, of chiropractic medicine, osteopathy, even martial arts or traditional Chinese medicine, which is all of it knows that the more centrated the body is, the more we can bring it back into a balanced place, the more optimal performance is going to be, the less likely there's going to be issues in the tissues, inflammation in the joints, and so on. So, anyway, that's my own little rant. We'll get back into you, but that's why when you ask, "Are you into yoga?" I'm like, "Yeah."
yeah.
For 3 to 5,000 years, it has refined itself. Now, can we use it to understand how it draws the body back into a more centrated place and then select the poses or
Right.
positions that we can either load or assist somebody in to really get them to be where they need to be? So when they're on the playing field, the pitch or the court or wherever on the ice, they're not going to be straining their hamstrings, or they're not going to have a lot of recurring injuries and those type of things.
Right. And
I
from a
know.
recovery standpoint,
I'm on the pulpit preaching to the choir. I didn't mean to.
no, but no, I mean, it's my favorite thing to talk about. It's exactly what I do. But I think the coolest thing too for me as a yoga instructor specifically has been seeing how the way that I teach and starting to get these athletes to shift from, some of that sympathetic nervous system tone more into a rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system space. And how that just drastically changes what they're experiencing in their bodies and how they feel after a workout and how they recover. Like that has been the coolest thing for me to witness in action with the work that I do.
Oh, I bet. I can see that.
Yeah.
So, okay, you've had plenty of time. You do your freelance work with other areas in your yoga instruction. So how does it compare when with an approach to professional NHL hockey players like the Kraken and the general population? Is there a difference?
For sure. I think the way that I teach a yoga class in general, though, is anytime I work with a team, it's going to be as specific to that sport as we can get. So what I really love to do is I love to watch the practice if I can, or at least watch, a hockey game or a football game, whatever the team is that I'm working with. It's really helpful for me to watch the sport and recognize what are the common movement patterns and what are the muscles that are getting worn down and what are the tissues that are going to be stressed most before I even go into work with these athletes. So understanding that, in the case of hockey players, they're skating nonstop, first of all, which is totally different than what general population does. We don't spend time on skates
No,
24/7.
heavily, much more frontal plane motion. So adductor strains and so on are one of those kind of the nemesis of a strength conditioning and athletic trainer for an NHL team.
Yeah, but for these guys, and especially it totally changes based on position too. Like the approach for a goalie for hockey is going to be different than the other guys too, because the extent of internal rotation that they have is just next level internal rotation of the hip. So that's a whole different, factor to consider as well. But in terms of hockey players in general, they're spending a lot of time in knee flexion and hip flexion. And so that's a lot of load on the lower body. And so I typically will select a lot of focus on the whole entire hip complex, really, because they're moving laterally, they're moving just like I said in those flex positions. So to provide a little bit more openness through the hip flexors, through the quads, and then also working, of course, on some hamstring mobility as well, because that just, gosh, I feel like there's very few athletes that I work with that can't benefit from some hamstring mobility. So, and
Right?
especially if you're spending all that time in that flex position and, not fully lengthening the leg, that definitely is beneficial for them to spend some time in that space. So,
Well, honestly, I can see the three big mobility targets, the big buckets, as we call them, right? The T spine, the hip pelvic region, and the ankles. I mean, the ankles are all laced up in a very stiff skate. And of course, they only have basically one linear point of contact instead of 3 points of contact. And when it comes to the rotational power that they have to
yes.
generate, typically bilaterally, because they're holding on to the stick with both hands, you don't get a lot of movement through the T spine. You don't get a lot of movement through the ankles. So you can see how that might create a lot of compensatory actions.
Yeah. And I think like those are the main things I consider when I'm building a yoga flow. So I think based on the sport, okay, are they going to have a lot more strain to their upper body or lower body? Where do we need to be spending? If I have 30 minutes to work with them, where does the focus need to go? So prioritizing time wise, what do we need to focus on? And then in addition to that, thinking, okay, what plane are we moving in? And also every single time before I teach a class, I open it up to the athletes as well. Like, where are you feeling this in your body? What do we need to address today that would make this really feel like the most meaningful time for you? So that's a huge component of what I do too, is just being able to have the repertoire to adapt on the fly too. Because I might have a plan and I go in to teach a class and I have guys telling me, oh my gosh, my lower back is just killing me. Or it's like, oh gosh, the spot in my neck, I slept weird last night. We were traveling, things just feel awful in my body. We need to kind of work maybe more on the upper spine and in the shoulders a little bit more too. So you get those factors thrown in too. And it's just helpful to check in with the athletes to hear from them. Where do we need to focus today? So that's always the most meaningful as well.
Yeah, and I imagine you mentioned buy-in earlier. I think like sometimes just the why word of yoga
Mm-hmm.
is something that you may want to just keep in your back pocket and just say,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm your flexibility coach or mobility coach or whatever. And then you just say, yeah, you just put in a pose here or there and they just start lighting up going, this is more than a stretch or whatever, right? I find that interesting. You don't strike me as the smudging ceremony kind of instructor, no spinning crystals, and you don't have to have the chimer and the gong going, which is probably going to scare the hell out of them anyway. So are there other ways that you do the buy-in with these Canadian
Oh,
international, like, because they are international and they're coming here and in the Pacific Northwest, which anyway, what's the way you get the buy-in?
yeah. And I mean, it's funny too, because the whole like realm of yoga is so broad. It's really like you go through this 200-hour yoga certification and they kind of send you on your way. And so that leaves a lot of room for flexibility. It's not like a franchise where you have a format you need to stick to or any sort of thing like that. And I taught bar for a while too, so I'm really familiar with that sort of thing too, and working within a framework. But you have a lot of, and that it's the hardest thing about being a yoga instructor and not having, I think, the crystals and the super deep meditation and all of that aspect is the roots are in India, and it's a super spiritual practice historically. And so how do I honor that while being a white woman in the Western world too? And like, how do I ensure that what I'm providing is not a watered down version of yoga, which is why it's super important that I start calling myself a mobility coach in a lot of different settings. So sometimes I go in and I'm like, am I really teaching a yoga class today, or am I teaching a mobility session? And so it's an interesting line to walk, because I'm classically trained as a yoga instructor, but then with my strength and conditioning background, that kind of gives me this lingo that helps to bring me more into a mobility space, if that makes sense.
It
So
makes complete sense. It makes
yeah,
complete sense because I can see how in everything you say, it is philosophy. It's to the point of it's a spiritual path. It just shy of maybe even constituting a religion, but
mhm,
there's a Ayurvedic medicine
yeah,
that there's so much to that culture that I think you just said it really well. You don't want to water it down, which I think that's why I was referring to California Fusion. Is we have
mhm,
so many just you got something that's amazing. Oh well, let's just reinvent it and we'll slap a new name on it. And but
yeah.
anyway,
But that is a huge piece of, like, when I walk into a space, I have to think about, okay, what's going to speak to these athletes the most? So for some athletes, they want to up their mental game. They want to be fierce mental competitors. And that means that their buy in for breath work is going to be tenfold to a sport that maybe doesn't require as much mental game. So with something like hockey, I don't necessarily come across a lot of athletes who are super into the breathing at first. And so I do kind of approach it more as like, I am going to be your mobility coach. And before I teach a class, oftentimes I will tell them what the goal of that session is and express to them why the plan is going to be that way. And I find that so often, if you just provide a simple why or a simple reason behind why you're doing what you're doing, that's going to help go a long ways in creating the buy-in. Because I mean, why would you do something that you're not given a good reason to do in the first place? Like, you know?
yeah,
So,
exactly. No, it's great. Here's the reason why. How does it apply to my life? And is it going to get me closer to my goal? You've got it all nailed down. Great, great coach.
and
So
sometimes if I walk into like an environment where I can sense that there's a lot more hesitation, sometimes I'll be like, listen, I have, sometimes I do list off my, I've got my bachelor's in human physiology, and I'm a student physical therapist, and I'm here to help you establish a mobility routine that works for you and your body. And a lot of times too, I'll ask at the beginning of a session, if it's the first time I've ever worked with a team, I'll ask, okay, who in this room has done yoga before? Raise your hand. And I'll usually get a few hands. And then after that, I'll ask them, okay, well, how many of you have a consistent mobility routine? And I'm constantly shocked by the
no.
very few numbers of hands that go up. It's like one or two.
Okay. Here's my thought as to why. Is because whatever you're good at, that's what you want to do more of. So if you're really good
100%.
at, if you're really good at lifting heavy stuff, counting to 10, doing that and putting it back down on a rack, then that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Now it takes, so, by doing that over and over, you're going to get, it's going to be hard to lengthen muscles if all you're doing is trying to shorten them. And on the flip side, you got all these, ultra flexible individuals, maybe even hypermobile. Well,
Yeah.
they love yoga because it's what they're good at. But ask them to shorten those muscles and so on. No. So you got the bendy people that migrate toward yoga and the ones that like to just do power and explosiveness. Yeah. So marrying them together, that's not an easy thing. You don't have
Yeah.
it's kind of an uphill battle for you, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is for sure. And also, not to mention the whole aspect of me being a woman walking into male dominated sports too.
Oh,
And
are you? Oh, I oh, that's funny. I didn't notice that. Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
that whole component thing where it's like,
oh
wait,
my
what
gosh.
is this small petite
Okay.
woman doing in the weight room? Like,
That's so weird. I saw the elephant in the room. I just didn't want to talk about it. Yeah, but okay, you brought it up. What is that like?
oh my gosh, I think it's something that was really challenging for me at first because it's hard to walk into a space like that and not feel like I have so much I need to prove. Like, and that can be really paralyzing because, if you're looking around and you're like, oh, there's not another female in sight. And so does that mean that I'm representing females in this workspace? And that feels like a lot of pressure. And well, what if I'm not good at that? And so I think there's like this whole process I had to go through of when, especially because I first started in football. So when you start in football, that's basically as, you know, male
As male as you're going to
testosterone
come,
dominant
right?
as you can get.
Exactly.
But it was trial by fire, and that was great for me. And I just ultimately had to trust that I knew my stuff. I was there for a reason. And as soon as I could settle into that, it's so much of it is just exhibiting the confidence. Because if I don't exhibit that confidence, then that's going to be palpable and people can see right through that. And then they're going to question what you know. And so I think that was a really big practice for me, was just trusting what I know, trusting my work to get me into those spaces in the first place, and running with it and running with that opportunity, and knowing that, it's going to be a little rocky at times, but that's going to be just part of the journey. And that's nothing, I didn't expect it to be comfortable. And so the growth that has come out of that has been super fun for me to see in terms of my career and also personally too. Like, it's definitely been an interesting practice of confidence for me. I think
I
especially
would say so.
at the beginning of my career too. Like, I really, when I zoom out, I'm not that far, I'm not trying to discredit myself here, but I feel like in a lot of ways I'm still just getting into, like, I haven't even obtained my doctor of physical therapy degree yet. And so I think that's also been a really cool experience for me to recognize, yes, I can be a lifelong learner, but I can also have confidence about what I know now and what I have to offer in a space.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. You've got your bachelor's, you're going for your master's and doctor, and your CSCS. Where do these lines of study conflict one another? It's easy to say how they integrate in, but there's some philosophies that are not shared by one or the other. And depending upon where you're going for physical therapy, if they are more progressive in their approach, that might be good. If they are more, shall I say, conventional and take in acute care and trying to fit the round peg into the square hole of chronic
Mhm.
issues, well, we've got something to talk about there. But like, how do you, all the disciplines that you're studying or have studied in the past, how do you find they integrate together, and where do they diverge?
That is such an interesting question, and I've never been asked that before. I've only
Well,
ever
here
been
I
asked.
am.
Yeah, I know,
Come on,
seriously.
let's do this. Yeah, come on, because there is. I mean, you've got to have conflict. Because
Yeah.
I just finished a course. I got to tell you, and I'm like, oh, I had to go off on a rant with my accountability partner, going, dude, no wonder there's so many recurring hamstring issues. If this is how it's going about,
Yeah.
not that I know everything or anything, but
No.
anecdotally, I've seen a lot more. Anyway, tell me,
I mean, no one knows everything. It's just, I
where
mean,
would you put it?
there's always more to learn. So,
Heck yeah.
I it's so clear to me how they integrate because it's all human body movement. Everything I do, like, I feel like I'll tell a lot of people, this is what I do. I'm a yoga instructor, I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I'm also a student physical therapist. And they're like, well, why don't you just pick one? I'm like, what do you mean? They're all human body movement. So to me,
Yeah.
that is just such the underlying theme and what I've been interested in, that it only made sense for me to start, investing in each of these different buckets to see how they can complement each other further. But it is such a process of going through, and a lot of my physical therapy schooling right now is about acute settings. And that's a really interesting component of, okay, so I'm getting all of this baseline knowledge, but this doesn't directly really connect to what I'm doing a ton right now. And so how do I parse through that to find the value that could be applicable? Or in a lot of situations, it's like, okay, this is just the certification or the degree that I'm going to have to get to in order to, and that is what's so hard about the whole process of certifications and education and everything. But
I'm just going to sell myself. I'm going to cheapen myself, and I'm going to answer the questions that they ask me the way they want me to answer them, just so I can get those letters or degree. And then I'm going to forget that or put it off on the shelf and do what I think is actually more effective.
Or the other component to that is I'm getting to this point, so then I can do the continued education I'm interested in. And that's actually what tipped the scales for me with getting my doctor of physical therapy. I started looking into, okay, I know the schooling isn't necessarily going to be directly applicable to what I'm currently doing in terms of a lot of its acute care and, you know, neuroscience and that sort of thing, which, I mean, you could totally, you know, semantics, and there's probably connections you can make there too. But I started looking into all of these continued education units that you can go and do following physical therapy. And you can also go and do, you know, like a residency for specifically orthopedics or sports or whatever it may be. And so it's just almost a matter of getting to a certain point so that then you can invest yourself further to make it more specific towards your niche.
Sure.
But
that's great. No.
Just, I don't know. There's not anything like, they definitely conflict though. It's like, why am I spending my time right now, you know, studying spinal cord injuries and gunshot wounds right now, you know, because it doesn't feel super applicable to what I'm doing. But then you think about, okay, well, in the case of a spinal cord injury, you know, you could still have someone on the ice obtain a spinal cord injury in some freak situation. So there are certain situations that I could see it applying to, but it's a lot of knowledge to parse through, and it's sometimes hard to find the common threads.
Yeah,
But it's
well,
all human
you're
movement.
at least that's it. Following the movement, and there's only, you know, we only have one spine, two arms, two legs. So there's a lot of basic truths that can resonate across the field, which is a wonderful thing. And if you look for those common bonds, and then the times where they don't align and there's conflict at an intersection, that's just an opportunity to kind of just test your own understanding and maybe your own philosophies and belief systems, and then let the dust settle and see where you are from there. So if anything, it's an opportunity to true our compass, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity for me to differentiate myself as a clinician or an instructor or a coach. And what is my personal, based on that information, what is my personal professional opinion? And I think that's kind of what starts to set you apart from other individuals in the field too, and makes what you do different from what the next person's doing. So
yeah, I know. I love it. What? How did you get into Setanta? Well, seeing that we're both online students and studying with them, what led you there?
I owe a lot of my connections to Ron McKeefrey, because he was also the person who got me connected to Setanta. And I had never heard of Setanta before I was working with Coach Mack. And when he brought it up in passing, I was like, this is a school in Ireland and you can go there for your practical portion. That sounds awesome. Like, I want an excuse to go to Ireland. So honestly,
right?
That's
Me
so
too.
much of the reason that I fell on Setanta. I was like, I just want an excuse to go to Ireland, so I might as well just say I'm getting a master's degree in order to give myself that excuse. So honestly, that's kind of what pointed me in that direction. And then on top of that, knowing that I wouldn't have to uproot from where I'm living, I can still do the work I'm doing here and still have the support systems I have here, and just get to continue to develop where I'm already planted.
Beautiful. And you're finishing up your master's this year, this spring or fall, correct?
Yes. It's technically, I think, August of 2024.
Okay. And then your DPT, how deep are you into that right now?
So I will finish that August of 2025.
Oh, nice. So you spread it out a little bit. That's cool.
Yeah.
And you have to do a residency somewhere?
So I will do 3 clinical rotations. So that will
Okay.
happen starting in the fall of this year.
And your hope is to stay in the Seattle region, or are you looking to go somewhere else?
It's funny you should ask. I think
Hmm.
ultimately it'll depend on where I get a job as a physical therapy or as a physical therapist, and then also hopefully someplace that values my perspective as a strength and conditioning coach as well as a yoga instructor. So I just want somewhere that's going to provide me the opportunity to work still in athletics, but also kind of wear my multiple hats and be able to bring a different perspective into the field.
Is there one particular sport over another that you have a preference to, whether it be hockey, football, basketball, anything?
Honestly, not particularly at this point. The only thing that kind of tips scales for me is that I am solidly conversational in Spanish. I'm like a step away from being fluent, but it's pretty appealing. Baseball and working in the Dominican is appealing to me because of that. So we'll see where that takes me.
Nice.
Mm.
Yeah, the DR. There's a lot of need down there. And it's a pretty cool setup that they have going. So, okay. So just back to the yoga a little bit. How many colleagues do you network with on other NHL teams that are in the position that you're in? That many, huh?
None. I have yet to meet someone, and I hope someone's listening. I like if you're
Yeah.
listening and you're doing this, please, I want to be friends because I would love to talk to someone else who's doing this because I've had such a cool experience. I would just love another perspective too. It's always great to have colleagues to learn from and grow with, but none.
Okay, I'll connect you with another yoga instructor on the East Coast that's working with the sports team. I'm hard pressed to remember the person's name at this time, but had her on about a couple of years ago, and we talked about it. I somewhere in upstate New York is what it's telling. My mind is telling me, but I'll connect. But yeah, okay. So that kind of just that makes sense to me in
Mhm.
some ways. I was actually expecting NBA teams. I was honestly thinking that there are probably without us knowing it, but I would imagine there's probably a few yoga instructors that come into the NBA teams. One, they've got deep pockets with fewer players, and therefore their support staff is almost one-to-one with the number of players compared to NFL, which I love the NFL, but it's old boy, it's good old boys, and they have a little harder time becoming progressive and changing. There's
Yeah.
still there's still a certain mentality, and it is good old boy club. So, but baseball definitely, because I mean they are really all about the flexibility portion of being out in the field and tremendous. I think baseball probably accepts flexibility in yoga more than any other major league sport, even soccer for that matter.
Yeah.
What sports did you grow up with?
Oh gosh. So I actually grew up ski racing, downhill ski racing.
Did you? What was your home
Yes.
mountain?
Mount Bachelor, Bend, Oregon.
Oh, so you're the yeah. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that place has my heart. It's like
Right
my
on.
home mountain through and through. But what's really interesting is I've had 3 knee surgeries. So
You don't say,
yeah.
really. Interesting. Somebody that is exploring human movement suffered several injuries. Oh, that never happens.
I know, groundbreaking stuff, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, should we guess? I mean, you being a downhill racer, did you do slalom, giant slalom, and downhill, and moguls, or what?
I did slalom and giant slalom primarily.
Slalom and giant slalom. Okay, so I might just guess and say there was at least one ACL rupture, lateral meniscal tear,
Okay,
or
that's a good guess.
yeah, but no. There
Yes,
it
but
goes again.
no. I know. Um, yes to the ACL, but then I was also, I mean, I in my childhood I did gymnastics, and so I have this like potential
Laxity.
hypothesis. Yes.
Okay, so PCL and MCL, those are my other ones then.
Okay. Also good guesses, but MPFL. So I've had 2 medial patellofemoral ligament reconstructions because I had 8 kneecap subluxations, 4 on each knee. Yeah. Yeah.
So were you a good racer, or are you just good at falling?
I was a good racer actually, because those were actually or like somewhere in between my ski racing. So
But they all happened on the mountain?
no, not the kneecap subluxations didn't. The kneecap subluxations were just like I was super injured, which is why I got so interested in yoga, of course, and then everything low impact, and then strength and conditioning and physical therapy. So um I I think I was just born with a loose ligament in my kneecap. So that is what kept me really from getting deeper into sports, and also why I so love being in a sports environment now.
Oh, interesting.
I know.
Okay, so I want to ask you about your compensatory patterns that you have encountered from those 3 episodes, and how they still affect your movement patterns to this day. What were they like when you were a teenager, like 5 years ago or something like that, right?
5 years ago.
Yeah.
Not wrong. Well, that's a really good question, because 2 of them were just super surgical. Like I just needed to get the 2 MPFLs. I needed new MPFLs basically.
We just need to ratchet those a little bit tighter.
Yeah.
Is that what they wanted to do? Okay, we're just going to go in there and just. Oh, I see.
They got stretched out to the point where it's like bungee jumping with a 10-foot too long cord. It's just not doing its job. So those needed to be surgically repaired. And then, but those were a long healing process because it's involving the patella, and anything with the patella is incredibly painful. So I've definitely noticed I have a really hard time with still with knees over toes extremes. So like hack squat never feels good for me. If you have a hack squat machine, I can, it's just there's scar tissue, so it's not really worth it. But
Got it.
I try to break it up some, but there's also the point where you got to manage the pain situation too. But in terms of ACL, definitely glute medius weakness. I definitely noticed that in myself as soon as I started getting more on the coaching side of things, and especially turned on my student physical therapist brain. Like it's so clear to me now that had I been introduced to I think to strength and conditioning at a younger age, it would have done wonders in terms of injury mitigation, mitigating risk of injury for me with that ACL injury in particular, because it was, excessive knee valgus and a really high velocity position that was exactly the mechanism of injury for me. And so it's really clear to me that, okay, and I wasn't introduced to weights in high school. I also had chronic pain for 7 years. So there was that whole situation where I had this leg pain.
Autoimmune?
What?
Was it autoimmune? What are we talking?
No, I was
7 years.
Yeah, I was 13 years old, and I started having pain when I was running or jumping, and couldn't figure out why. I went to a bunch of doctors, and no one could figure out why. So it was really odd. I never got a specific diagnosis, but I suspect now that it might have been a combination of the MPFL injuries, as well as the fact that I wasn't introduced to strength and conditioning. I wasn't introduced to resistance training. And I think that could have done such a great job in terms of mitigating that pain for me, and probably leading me to be just a healthier, younger teenager. So actually, because I was injured, I didn't get introduced to lifting in my PE class because I couldn't go run. And so then I was asked to vacuum the weight room while everyone else in the class went running.
Wow, what a great PE teacher. Really concerned about hygiene. Yeah. So I'm just curious, did any toe fracture, like your fifth toe, or any history of inversion sprains?
No.
Nothing like that? Mm-hmm. Never. Okay, curious. Just wondering. Okay, so CSCS. What we didn't really talk about that. You went. Obviously, you have to have a bachelor's degree to go for your certified strength conditioning specialist. So was that as soon as you finished your bachelor, you went for that, or was your university one of those that was actually gearing you up to take it so that near graduation you were just launched into that?
No, not at all. That would have been cool, actually.
Wouldn't
But
it? Shouldn't all universities kind of do that?
seriously. But I thought I was going to go to acupuncture school. So I actually did for 2 weeks. I know, because for me, in my chronic pain, acupuncture was huge in my pain management. And so I got super interested in becoming a practitioner of acupuncture. By the way, that's 4 years of schooling. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of people don't know that, but it is 4 years of school to become a doctor of acupuncture.
In Santa Cruz, where we are right now, we have one of the most reputable acupuncture schools in the nation, 5 Branches Institute.
Yes.
And it's fantastic.
I looked at that one. But I went to acupuncture school for 2 weeks, and after obtaining a human physiology degree from the University of Oregon and having such exposure to Western medicine, I really craved a graduate program or further education that was a little bit more Western medicine based, because I realized just how interested I was specifically in that after getting my undergrad. And so I knew before I wanted to apply to a program that I wanted to see if I could do the strength and conditioning coach thing full time. I wanted to see if my interest was there instead. And that's when I reached out to University of Washington football. And as soon as
Go Huskies.
as soon as Coach DeBoer and his staff came in here, that's when I turned to my partner and I was like, well, I'm not tied to be in San Diego here. If there's opportunity for you elsewhere, and he threw out Seattle, and I was like, honestly, great, worked out for both of us to end up here. And that's when I then proceeded to get my CSCS. But it wasn't until after I had my whole stint in acupuncture school that I then figured out, okay, strength and conditioning is actually, I think, where I want to be. And then after a year of doing that, I figured out, okay, I want something that's still going to keep me a little bit more in healthcare. And that also was partially due to an orthopedic trip I took to the Dominican Republic, where I translated for an orthopedic team of physical therapy for the Dominican patients there. So it was all just nice. A volunteer trip, but that's really what sent me over the edge of, okay, I want something that's going to also allow me to have the clinical medical experience as well. So kind of pushed me towards DPT a little bit more.
Well, and coincidentally enough, you become a physical therapist. One of your continuing education courses is going to be dry needling, right? Yeah. It's going to happen. You're just going to be like, oh, I found my TCM or my acupuncture eventually. Like Sue Falzone is doing great work down in Houston with the Texans and the program she developed with them. Prior to that, of course, she was with the Dodgers and other organizations, but she's huge into dry needling. Her courses are fantastic. So I wouldn't be surprised if you cross paths with her as soon as you're done with your DPT.
Oh, for sure. And dry needling is awesome. I think it feels awful and great all at once.
Yes, such as
dry needling, you know what I'm talking about. It's
oh yes. Yeah, it is. It's interesting how the wave of Eastern philosophies is crashing upon the Western shores. And it's really nice to see it finding a place into professional sports as well, and not being shut away due to prejudice, I guess you'd say. Yeah. So how often are you working with the Kraken? Like right now we're in the season. So is it, are you only going in when it's game day -2, game day -1? Are you doing it on game day? Do they have you rotating around that type of schedule? Or is it, hey, we've got an opening here, they're going to be home, let's get you in here?
The latter, because their travel schedule is wild. And as an independent contractor too, it's just a matter of, okay, when is everyone going to be in the same place? So I typically see them the most in the off season, because I mean, they just had a stretch that was 13 days on the road. So it's super challenging during the season to even coordinate getting a yoga session in for them.
What if you were to just go, hey, Nate, what do you think of this idea that I just come in for like 20 to 30 minutes and offer just breath work, and your sports scientists are showing me the ones that are fatiguing, that they're going from one time zone to the other, and their biorhythms are completely whacked out. I just come in there once a week, and they suggest these players go in and see me. Sound like a good idea?
I mean, I'd say yes. I've been really I've been bugging Nate a lot lately, so
Good.
we'll give him another week or so and give him a little break. I like to walk the line of making sure he doesn't get too sick of me, but also, making sure he still knows I'm there.
That's good. I love it. Caroline, I've really had a fun time talking here. We've got a few minutes left. So always I want to give people an opportunity to, like, if you're into the social media realm and you do posting, where people are just interested in the work that you're doing, whether all the things that you're doing, I don't even want to, you probably have 4 different posts or social media sites in which to follow, but how do people follow you?
Yeah, please reach out. I'm Flex by Caroline. So it's my brand. It's a little play on flex, strength, and also flexibility. So that's a little behind the why of my name, but it's just at Flex by Caroline. I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, and I also have a website, which is also just flexbycaroline.com. So you can find me and reach out any of those ways. But yeah, I always love to connect with people.
Right on. Okay. And then my other question is, obviously you're going through these educational pathways, and but what's piquing your interest along this journey, whether it's within the confines of the studies that you're in right now, or if it's on the side that once I'm done with this, and once I'm done with this is where my attention's going to be. Is there something like that?
There is actually. Also, I forgot I have a YouTube channel too. So you can find some free
YouTube?
yoga. Yeah, you can find some free yoga with Flex by Caroline on YouTube too. So
I'm going there.
yes. But really lately what's been interesting for me is to start to figure out how I can incorporate things from a rehabilitation standpoint into the classes I teach as a yoga instructor. So I've started playing a little bit more with nerve flossing within my yoga classes. So that's something I'm starting to build out a little bit more in terms of, especially for sciatica and piriformis syndrome and things like that, trying to figure out how we can get a little more creative with nerve flossing within some of my yoga flows or mobility sessions. So that has been really interesting. Of course, long term, I'm looking to get into some dry needling, some acupressure as well. I'd like to look into that a little bit more. I've always really been interested with hands-on manual physical therapy too. So I wouldn't mind taking a cranial sacral therapy course down the road or something along those lines. But I'm also going to look a little bit more into the literature about that modality a little bit more before I fully commit to that certification. So but really for me lately, it's just been putting my student hat on, staying interested, staying curious, and taking some deep dives into the literature and starting to really question, why am I doing what I'm doing as a teacher, as a coach, as an instructor, and ensuring that I'm just constantly trying to find the best information out there that I can to be really driven by that.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it's going to end anytime soon. I think that's probably, that's your mission in life. So it's going to be with you for a while. Mm-hmm. Right on. Caroline, this has been so much fun. I really have thoroughly enjoyed this. And I think I was going to say this is groundbreaking, but as I think back, I have had another yoga instructor in the world of sports, but it's nice to know that there's more out there like yourself. So thanks for being on, and I look forward to when our paths cross in the future.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really awesome. It's been great to chat with you, so I appreciate it.
Right on.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Caroline for coming on, as well as the Seattle Kraken organization for making this happen. And don't forget, go to school with us at Setanta College. 10% off tuition with the code RS10, RS10, setantacollege.com, where they offer a whole bunch of degrees, not just masters, but if you're pursuing a master's, you can get it in performance coaching, perhaps. They've got 4 tracks: sports injury and return to performance management, applied sports biomechanics and movement science, and applied sport and exercise psychology. So check them out. And while you're at it, pick up a copy of my book. We'll see you next week.